Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, I'm bringing you something a little different, 3 disturbing real stories that were captured on camera. Photos and video footage that document the exact moments when normal situations turned into absolute nightmares. These aren't urban legends or second-hand accounts. These are verified experiences from real people who had the presence of mind, or the terror-driven instinct, to document what was happening to them. The footage exists. The photos are real. And what they captured will stay with you long after this video ends. Before we dive in, I want to know, have you ever captured something disturbing on camera? Something you can't explain, something that still makes your skin crawl when you look at it? Drop a comment and share your experience. And if you have photos or video footage of a genuinely creepy encounter you'd like to submit for a future episode, you can email them to me. I'll include the address at the end of this video. What makes these stories particularly unsettling is that we're not just hearing about what happened. We can see it. We have proof. Evidence that these encounters actually occurred exactly as described. Alright, let's begin. And remember, every word of these stories is true, and the footage is real. Story 1. The Man Who Came Out of the Woods. Mark was a college student living in a quiet house in rural Indiana. The property sat adjacent to a dense stretch of woods, the kind that feels peaceful and scenic during the day but takes on a completely different character after dark. During daylight hours, everything about the location felt perfectly normal. Safe, even. The woods were just woods, trees and wildlife and the occasional hiking trail. But at night, those same woods made the entire property feel isolated and strange. Like the darkness between the trees was hiding something that only came out when the sun went down. Behind Mark's house, tucked under the back patio, there was a hot tub. That seemingly innocuous detail is important, because that's where everything happened. It was Saturday night, March 29th, around 12:30 a.m. Spring break was ending, and classes were set to resume in just a few days. Mark had invited 3 of his close friends over for one last hangout before everyone went back to the grind of school: Kyle, Keenan, and Derek. They were spending what they thought would be a normal, fun night together. They'd been in Mark's garage for most of the evening, playing pool, blasting music through a portable speaker, drinking, laughing, just enjoying themselves. Everything felt completely relaxed and carefree. It seemed like a perfect end to spring break. After a couple hours of this, Kyle suggested they move the party to the hot tub. It was cold outside, probably in the low 40s, so the idea of sitting in warm water sounded even more appealing than usual. Everyone immediately agreed. They went inside to change into swim trunks, grabbed fresh drinks, and headed out to the patio. The hot tub was already heated and ready. They climbed in, and the contrast between the cold night air and the warm water felt incredible. They talked, made jokes, didn't pay much attention to the time or their surroundings. Just 4 friends relaxing and enjoying each other's company. Then they heard something that made everyone go quiet. The sound of sticks breaking in the woods. Distinct cracking sounds, like branches snapping under weight. And it didn't sound like an animal moving through the underbrush. The pattern was wrong, too deliberate, too rhythmic. It sounded like footsteps. Like someone walking through the woods toward them. They all stopped talking and listened intently, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. Keenan tried to break the tension by saying it was probably nothing. Just a deer or something. Maybe a raccoon. The others forced themselves to laugh, trying to shake off the nervous feeling that was creeping over the group. They turned the music up louder and attempted to get back into the relaxed vibe they'd been enjoying. But everyone was a little more tense now, a little more aware of the dark woods surrounding them. About 10 minutes passed. The conversation had mostly returned to normal, though nobody had completely forgotten about the sounds they'd heard. Then a man walked out of the woods. He stepped directly into the light cast by the patio fixtures, emerging from the darkness between the trees like he'd materialized out of nothing. He was wearing the strangest combination of clothing any of them had ever seen: a long black coat that hung down past his knees, white sweatpants that looked almost luminous in the patio light, and, most bizarrely, a gaming headset with a microphone boom. Like he'd just stood up from playing video games in his bedroom and wandered into the woods. His eyes were wide open, unnaturally wide, and his face showed absolutely no emotion. No smile, no frown, nothing. Just a blank, empty expression. Everyone in the hot tub jumped and started yelling immediately. "Who the fuck are you? What are you doing here? This is private property." The questions came rapid fire, overlapping each other, fueled by adrenaline and fear. The man slowly raised both hands in what might have been meant as a calming gesture, though it came across as deeply unsettling given his expressionless face. "My name is Seth," he said in a flat, emotionless voice. "I'm 33 years old. I heard you guys laughing and having fun. I wanted to join you." The four friends just stared at each other, completely confused and disturbed by what was happening. Mark, whose house it was, tried to take control of the situation. "You need to leave. Right now. Get off my property." Seth didn't respond to the command. Didn't acknowledge it at all. Instead, he calmly began removing his clothing. First the long black coat, which he let drop to the patio floor. Then his shoes, which he stepped out of slowly and deliberately. Then, to everyone's absolute horror, he pulled off his white sweatpants. He was now standing on Mark's patio wearing nothing but underwear and the gaming headset, his pale skin reflecting the patio lights. Before anyone could react or process what was happening, Seth stepped forward and climbed into the hot tub with them. He just got in. Lowered himself into the water like this was completely normal, like he'd been invited. No one knew what to say. The situation was so bizarre, so far outside the realm of normal experience, that their brains couldn't quite process an appropriate response. Mark had the presence of mind to pull out his phone. Not to call the police immediately, but to start recording. Not because he thought the situation was funny or wanted content for social media, but because the whole thing felt so surreal that he knew nobody would believe him without proof. This is the actual footage he captured that night. Video shows a pale man with wide eyes sitting in a hot tub with four clearly uncomfortable college students. The man is wearing a gaming headset and staring blankly at the camera. The audio captures nervous laughter and confused questions. "What the fuck?" one voice says. "Dude, seriously, who are you?" another asks. The man in the video, Seth, just sits there, not responding, his expression never changing. Once Mark felt he had enough footage to prove this actually happened, the group started asking Seth direct questions, trying to understand what the hell was going on. "Where did you come from? Do you know someone who lives here? How did you know we were out here?" Seth's answers were repetitive and unsatisfying. He just kept saying variations of the same thing. He heard them laughing, he wanted to hang out, he thought they seemed fun. His effect was completely flat the entire time. No emotion, no normal social cues, just those wide eyes staring at them. Then Seth said something that changed everything. Something that turned uncomfortable into genuinely frightening. He said, very matter-of-factly, with no change in his expression or tone, "I molested a child." Just stated it like he was mentioning the weather. Like it was a casual piece of information about himself. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Whatever strange tolerance the group had been maintaining, trying to be non-confrontational, trying to figure out how to handle this bizarre situation, evaporated completely. All four of them jumped out of the hot tub immediately, water sloshing everywhere. They started yelling at Seth to get out, to leave, to get the fuck off the property right now. They physically pulled him out of the water, grabbing his arms and hauling him onto the patio deck. Seth didn't resist at all. Didn't fight back or try to stay in the hot tub. He just let himself be removed, standing there dripping wet, still expressionless. Then, without saying another word, he slowly walked back toward the woods. His movements were eerily calm and deliberate. He didn't rush, didn't look back, just walked steadily toward the tree line. Within seconds, he disappeared back into the darkness, swallowed by the shadows between the trees. The four friends immediately ran inside the house and locked every door, front door, back door, garage door, everything. Some of them laughed nervously, trying to process what had just happened through humor and bravado. But Mark and Kyle weren't laughing. They both had this terrible feeling that it wasn't over. That Seth was still out there, still watching. About 15 minutes passed. The group was inside trying to calm down, trying to convince themselves that Seth was gone and wouldn't come back. Then Kyle said they should go back outside to put the cover on the hot tub and make sure everything was locked up properly. Mark agreed, though he really didn't want to go back out there. They grabbed flashlights and stepped onto the patio, moving quickly, wanting to secure everything and get back inside as fast as possible. That's when Mark saw something lying on the ground next to the hot tub. A phone. A smartphone, face down on the wet patio surface. He picked it up, and the screen automatically lit up from the movement. Whatever was on that lock screen, the wallpaper image that Mark saw, made him immediately drop the phone like it had burned his hand. He's never been willing to describe exactly what the image was. When people ask, he just says it was disturbing and leaves it at that. But the reaction was visceral and immediate. Whatever he saw scared him badly. "He's coming back," Mark said to Kyle, his voice shaking. Seth left his phone. "He's going to come back for it." They ran back inside and told the others what they'd found. Everyone tried to stay calm, tried to rationalize that maybe Seth had just forgotten his phone and would leave them alone. Then they heard it, a gentle tapping sound on one of the windows. Mark already knew who it was before he looked. But he forced himself to walk over to the window and open the curtain. Seth was standing right there on the other side of the glass. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes were still unnaturally wide, and now he was smiling, this creepy, unnatural smile that didn't reach his eyes. He didn't say anything. Didn't move. Just stood there staring directly at Mark through the window, smiling. Mark yelled for Kyle. Kyle ran into the room, took one look at Seth's face pressed against the window, and immediately called 911. Mark grabbed a baseball bat from the hall closet and went to the front door. He opened it slightly, not enough for Seth to push through, but enough to yell out. "Leave right now. Take your fucking phone and get out of here. The police are coming." Seth didn't respond verbally. Instead, he slowly began walking around the side of the house, moving out of Mark's line of sight. Mark followed his movement by going to different windows, tracking where Seth was going. He watched through the patio door as Seth appeared in the backyard again, standing in the exact same spot where he'd been tapping on the window. Still staring into the house. Still smiling that horrible smile. Mark yelled through the glass, "The cops are already on their way. You need to leave right now." Seth didn't react to the threat. Didn't seem concerned at all. Instead, he slowly raised one hand and gave a single, deliberate wave. Just once. A slow, creepy wave while maintaining eye contact and that unsettling smile. Then he turned and walked back into the woods, disappearing into the darkness once again. The police arrived maybe 5 or 6 minutes later, which felt like an eternity to the terrified group inside. The officers took statements from all 4 of them, listened to their description of Seth and what he'd done, examined the phone he'd left behind. Then they searched the woods with flashlights and spotlights from their vehicles. They found Seth maybe a quarter mile into the trees, standing alone in a small clearing, just staring back toward Mark's house. He didn't run or resist when they approached. Just stood there with that same blank expression. They arrested him on the spot for trespassing and potentially other charges related to his confession about molesting a child. Everyone thought it was over. Seth was in custody, the danger had passed, they could finally relax. But Mark didn't feel that sense of relief. Something still felt wrong. A few days later, Mark was scrolling through Snapchat when he saw a post from a girl who lived in the same general area, maybe a mile or 2 away from his house. She'd posted a video with a caption about how someone had tried to break into her house late at night. Mark clicked on the video, expecting to see Seth's face. But it wasn't Seth. It was a completely different man, different build, different features, different mannerisms. But engaging in the same kind of behavior, approaching a stranger's house late at night, trying to gain entry, exhibiting strange and threatening behavior. That's what disturbed Mark more than anything else about the entire experience. It suggested that Seth might not have been acting alone. That there might be multiple people in the area doing this kind of thing. Maybe they were connected somehow. Maybe they shared information or worked together. Or maybe, even worse, the woods near Mark's house just attracted this type of person for some reason. Either way, the implication was clear and terrifying. Seth might not be the only one out there. There could be others. And they might not be done. Story 2, what they found in the tunnel. A few years ago, 3 high school friends named Beck, Matthew, and Tyler made a decision that nearly cost them their lives. They decided to explore a storm drain tunnel in their neighborhood during winter break. The kind of stupid, reckless decision that teenagers make because they are bored and think they're invincible. It was the middle of winter in their part of Pennsylvania. Freezing cold outside, temperatures well below freezing at night. The tunnel they'd been curious about was located at the edge of their suburban neighborhood, running under a small creek next to an office park. These office buildings were mostly empty during the day and completely dark and abandoned looking at night. The boys had seen the tunnel entrance before during their various adventures around the neighborhood, but they'd never actually gone inside. It always looked creepy and uninviting, a large circular opening leading into complete darkness. They joked about exploring it many times, daring each other to go in, but deep down they'd all been too nervous to actually follow through. Until that particular night, when boredom and teenage bravado finally overwhelmed common sense. They decided they'd finally do it. Actually go into the tunnel and see what was in there. They brought sleds with them as a cover story. If anyone asked what they were doing in an office park parking lot at night, they'd say they were sledding on the hills behind the buildings. As soon as they pulled into the parking lot in Tyler's car, a police cruiser appeared seemingly out of nowhere. A uniformed officer got out and walked over to their vehicle, clearly suspicious. "What are you boys doing here?" he asked, shining his flashlight into the car. Tyler, thinking quickly, said they were just looking for a good sledding hill. Pointed to the sleds in the back seat as proof. The officer looked at them skeptically for a long moment, clearly not entirely buying the story but also not having enough evidence to do anything about it. "This is private property," he finally said. "You need to leave. Now." So they left. Drove out of the parking lot with the officer watching to make sure they actually departed. But they didn't give up on their plan. They just adjusted it. After driving around aimlessly for about 30 minutes, killing time, letting the officer move on to other calls, they came back. This time they parked much farther away, behind a different building where security cameras and passing patrol cars wouldn't spot Tyler's vehicle. They walked across the dark parking lot and down a steep hill behind the office buildings. The night was brutally cold. They could see their breath with every exhalation, forming clouds of vapor in the freezing air. They stood at the entrance to the tunnel, all three of them suddenly quiet as they stared into the darkness. The opening was bigger than they'd realized from a distance, probably 8 feet in diameter, perfectly round, made of concrete that looked old and weathered. And it was completely, utterly dark inside. Their eyes couldn't penetrate more than a few feet into the entrance. Beck pulled out his phone and started recording. The other two turned on their flashlights, and they stepped inside. Video footage begins, showing the circular tunnel stretching ahead into darkness. The audio captures echoing footsteps and nervous breathing. "Turn off your light, everybody," someone whispers in the video. "Just for a second." The lights click off, and the darkness becomes absolute. "Dude, this is crazy," a voice says in the blackness. Lights click back on. "Oh, look at this date, dude," Beck's voice says. The camera focuses on graffiti spray painted on the tunnel wall in large red numbers, 61,919. 1919, Matthew says. "Holy shit, that's like 100 years old." "No, look closer," Tyler corrects. "It says the 19th of June 19. Like June 19th, 2019. That was like 6 months ago." "Oh my god," Beck says quietly. "This was done recently." The paint does look newer than the other graffiti surrounding it. Brighter red, sharper edges, less weathering. That observation makes all three of them noticeably more nervous, though they try to hide it by continuing forward. Inside the tunnel, the ground was mostly dry despite the creek above. The only moisture came from water dripping somewhere deeper in, a rhythmic dripping sound that echoed off the curved walls. Graffiti covered almost every surface. Most of it looked old and faded, layers upon layers of tags and messages spanning decades. Their flashlights weren't very strong, just phone flashlights and a single handheld light Tyler had brought, and they couldn't see very far ahead. The darkness seemed to absorb the light after about 15 or 20 feet. Still, they kept walking, trying to act tough and unafraid, but their voices betrayed their growing nervousness. The farther they went into the tunnel, the colder it got. Which didn't make sense. They were underground, insulated from the outside temperature. If anything, it should have been warmer. But the temperature was dropping dramatically the deeper they went. Even though they were protected from the wind, they could still see their breath. Their flashlights started revealing why it was so cold. The walls were covered in ice. Thick sheets of it, coating the concrete. Massive icicles hung from the curved ceiling, some of them 2 or 3 feet long, pointing down like frozen spears. Video continues, showing the impressive but threatening ice formations. "Keep it slow, someone warns. "Oh shit, I see a light down there." "What? Where?" "I thought I saw something moving." "Wait, what was that?" "Hello?" Beck calls out into the darkness. His voice echoes back mockingly. Keep going, Bro, these icicles can like impale you, dude. Look how big." Suddenly, a loud crack echoes from somewhere deeper in the tunnel. The sound is sharp and violent, like something heavy hitting stone, or a thick piece of ice shattering. All three of them immediately turn and start running back toward the entrance. The video becomes chaotic, bouncing images, heavy breathing, footsteps echoing loudly. Go, someone yells. They tripped over each other, slipped on the damp ground, bumped into the walls in their panic to get out. When they finally burst out of the tunnel entrance into the freezing night air, they were all breathing hard, hands on their knees, hearts pounding. That's when Beck realized his phone was missing. He dropped it somewhere while they were running. It must have fallen out of his pocket or slipped from his hand during the chaos. "Forget it, man," Tyler said immediately. "We're not going back in there." "Fuck that phone," Matthew agreed. "Just get a new one. We're leaving." But Beck wasn't willing to abandon his phone. It had all his photos, his contacts, everything. He grabbed Tyler's flashlight and started walking back toward the tunnel entrance. "Beck, don't," Matthew started. But Beck wasn't listening. He disappeared back into the darkness. Tyler and Matthew looked at each other, both clearly not wanting to follow. But they couldn't let their friend go alone. So reluctantly, they followed him back into the tunnel. It felt different this time. More oppressive, more threatening. The air felt heavy and wrong, like the atmosphere had changed in the few minutes they'd been outside. Their flashlights seemed weaker, less effective against the darkness. And the silence was even worse than before, not just quiet, but an active, hostile silence that made every small sound seem amplified and threatening. They all felt like something was watching them from the darkness beyond their light. New video footage begins as Beck starts recording again with Matthew's phone. "I feel like my pocket got like a little emptier over here," Beck says, patting his jacket. "Like somewhere around here." "Go over there," Tyler says. "This way." "Dude, that's where we heard the noise," Matthew protests. His voice is shaking. "Fuck, dude. Do I have to go back there?" "You're going first, bro," Tyler says firmly. "Yeah, we're not leading the way." "Somebody else lead the way, please." "No, it's your phone." At some point off camera, Beck found his phone lying on the ground maybe 50 yards into the tunnel. But instead of immediately leaving, the group decided to continue deeper, curiosity and teenage stubbornness overriding common sense. That's when they heard the sound that ended their exploration permanently. In the video, all three boys suddenly freeze. "That rock, it must have hit like here or something," Beck says, trying to rationalize what they're hearing. Then it comes, a scream. A loud, piercing, unmistakably human scream coming from somewhere deep in the tunnel. Not an animal sound. Not wind through pipes. A human being screaming. It echoed off the walls, seeming to come from everywhere at once, and it sounded like it was getting closer. The three friends didn't wait to investigate or rationalize. They turned as one and ran as fast as they could toward the entrance. This time nobody talked. Nobody looked back. Nobody tripped or hesitated. They just sprinted with pure terror driving every step. When they reached Tyler's car, they jumped in, and he drove away without even checking mirrors, just flooring the accelerator. The drive back to their neighborhood was almost entirely silent except for heavy breathing. All three of them thought it was over when they each arrived at their respective homes. Ready to never speak of it again, ready to move on with their lives. But late that night, probably around 2 o'clock or 3 a.m., Beck's doorbell rang. Twice. 2 distinct rings in the middle of the night. Beck's dad, confused and concerned, went to answer the door. Nobody was there. The porch was empty, the street was quiet. Maybe it was just teenagers playing ding-dong ditch. That's what Beck's dad assumed. But Beck knew better. He knew the timing was too coincidental. Were they followed home that night? Did whoever, or whatever, was in that tunnel track them back to their houses? Or was it really just an unfortunately timed prank that had nothing to do with their exploration? That remains a mystery. The three friends never went back to that tunnel. Never even drove past it if they could avoid it. The night left more questions than answers. But they all heard the noises. They all saw the evidence on video. Perhaps it was something they weren't meant to stumble upon. Something that didn't want to be found. And maybe next time, it won't just be a warning. Story 3, The Cult in the Woods. In April of 2022, a man I'll call Ryan took a temporary construction job far from his home as part of a 3-month accommodation program. The pay was decent, better than what he'd been making, and he desperately needed every dollar. He wasn't in the best place financially, and the opportunity seemed too good to pass up. The fact that he'd be working alongside his longtime friend Jim made the offer even more appealing. They figured it would be a positive experience, extra cash, time away from home, a break from the chaos and stress of their everyday lives. The job itself wasn't bad at all. A few weeks in, Ryan had adjusted well to the routine and the work. But the area where they were stationed was incredibly remote, deep in rural countryside, far from any major cities or towns. Long, winding roads stretched for miles with barely any signs of human habitation. It wasn't unusual to drive 20 or 30 miles without seeing a single house. Ryan had always loved the outdoors and solitude, though, so he saw this isolation as a feature rather than a bug. It was a chance to truly unplug from modern life. Most of his co-workers spent their weekends drinking at the nearest bar or driving into town to find entertainment. But Ryan had different plans. He wanted genuine solitude. Peace and quiet away from people. So when Friday rolled around after his third week on the job, he packed camping gear and prepared for a weekend of hiking and camping deep in the forest. There was a narrow trailhead just 5 minutes from the temporary housing where the construction workers were staying. Within 20 minutes of starting his hike, Ryan was deep in the woods. The only sounds were wind moving through trees and the crunch of his boots on the trail. He smoked a couple joints as he walked, letting the stress and tension of the workweek melt away. The isolation was genuinely comforting to him. At least at first. Around 7 p.m., the sun began sinking behind the treetops. Shadows stretched long across the narrow trail. Ryan knew it was time to find a suitable place to set up camp for the night. That's when he noticed something unusual in the air, the scent of burning firewood. A light haze of smoke drifting between the trees. At first, it seemed normal enough. Probably just another camper in the area. Maybe a local who knew good camping spots. But then he caught something in his peripheral vision. The faint orange glow of firelight flickering through the trees off to his left, away from the trail. Curious and feeling confident, Ryan had trained in combat sports during his teens and stayed in good physical shape. He decided to investigate. He left the maintained trail and headed toward the source of the smoke and light. He wasn't scared. He figured it was just another person camping, and maybe they'd be friendly, maybe they could share stories. Still, something about the situation felt slightly off. A vague sense of wrongness he couldn't quite identify. As he moved closer to the light source, pushing through underbrush, he started seeing strange metallic glints in the firelight. Shopping carts. Dozens of them. They were tied to trees with ropes, suspended from branches in bizarre configurations. Some were hanging upside down, others were positioned at odd angles like they'd been deliberately arranged into some kind of twisted sculpture garden. Mangled and rusted, creating this nightmarish jungle gym of oxidized steel hanging in the forest. It definitely didn't look like a normal campsite. It looked intentional. Ritualistic. Like something meant to be seen and to inspire fear or awe. Ryan pulled out his phone and started taking photos. He knew his friends back home would never believe this without visual proof. Nobody would believe there was a shopping cart shrine in the middle of the forest. Photo 1. Multiple shopping carts tied to trees, illuminated by firelight. Then something even stranger caught his attention and made his stomach turn. Suspended directly above the fire on a metal framework was a charred, old-fashioned decorative duck ornament, the kind you might see in someone's garden or on a porch. Sitting in the duck's back, positioned like a rider, was a baby doll. But the doll was horrifically burned and melted. Its plastic limbs were warped and twisted from heat exposure, its face was partially melted away, and what remained was scorched black. Ryan took a photo of that too, though the longer he stared at it, the more deeply disturbed he felt. Photo 2. Charred duck ornament with melted baby doll. His chest began tightening. His breathing became shallow. The fire was actively burning, clearly tended recently. There were water bottles scattered around the camp area. Boot prints in the dirt that looked fresh. Someone had been there very recently. Maybe was still there, watching from the shadows beyond the firelight. Ryan thought seriously about turning around right then and heading straight back to the trailhead. But something made him continue forward. Probably a combination of cannabis-fueled curiosity and stubborn refusal to let fear control him. He tried to convince himself it was nothing concerning, just some weird loner, maybe drunk or high, probably harmless despite the disturbing decorations. Still, he checked over his shoulder more than once as he continued hiking. 20 minutes passed, and he put what he thought was sufficient distance between himself and that bizarre camp. Daylight was fading fast, though, and he needed to gather firewood before it got too dark to see properly. He had emergency fire-starting materials in his pack, but not enough wood to sustain a fire through the entire night. He veered off the trail again, this time just to collect fallen branches and suitable burning material. After about an hour of preparation, gathering wood, clearing a space, setting up his tent, Ryan had built a small fire and was settling in for the evening. It was around 9 p.m. when he prepared a simple camping meal, steak and potato wrapped in foil and nestled in the fire's embers. He smoked another joint to dull the lingering anxiety from the shopping cart camp, and for a while, everything seemed okay again. The forest was peaceful. The fire was warm. He felt safe. With his meal finished and the fire crackling pleasantly, Ryan decided to turn in for the night. He put on a pre-downloaded podcast playlist, true crime episodes about cold cases and unsolved murders, and listened through his earbuds as the forest around him darkened completely. There was no cell signal out there, no distractions. Just firelight, his tent, and narrated stories about people who disappeared without a trace. At some point, he drifted off to sleep. He woke up suddenly. The air inside his tent felt noticeably colder than when he'd fallen asleep. The fire outside had dimmed significantly, barely glowing. He checked his phone, 4 a.m. He didn't immediately know what had woken him. Hadn't had a nightmare that he could remember. Then he heard it, whistling. A slow, eerie tune carried through the trees. Not a bird call or wind through branches. Definitely human whistling. And it was getting closer to his camp. Ryan froze completely. His body wouldn't move, like something primitive in his brain had shut down all voluntary muscle control. He lay perfectly motionless in his sleeping bag, listening as the whistling grew louder and nearer. Then the whistling stopped abruptly. What followed was somehow worse, soft footsteps. Quick, light, and eerily quiet. They were circling his tent. Moving around the perimeter of his camp in a deliberate pattern. Ryan couldn't see whoever was out there, but he could hear them clearly. Crunching twigs, shifting leaves, moving in a slow circle around where he was hiding. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might be audible outside the tent. Then suddenly, without conscious thought, his body snapped back into motion. Survival instinct overrode the paralysis. He jumped up, shoved his feet into his unlaced boots, and burst out of the tent into the darkness. He grabbed his flashlight but didn't turn it on, didn't want to give away his exact position or direction. What made the situation exponentially worse was the realization that the footsteps had been coming from the direction of the trail. The way back to safety, back to his car, back to civilization was now blocked by whoever was out there. He had no choice but to run deeper into the forest, away from the trail, into completely unfamiliar territory. He sprinted as fast as he could, crashing through brush and low-hanging branches that whipped at his face and arms. Behind him, he heard more footsteps. Multiple sets now, overlapping and out of sync. The sounds were too scattered, too numerous to be just one person. There were at least 2 of them chasing him, maybe more. For 5 straight minutes, Ryan ran at full speed. His lungs burned, his legs screamed in protest, but terror kept him moving. He finally found a dense cluster of trees and thick underbrush. He dove into it, burying himself in leaves and tangled roots, trying to make himself as small and invisible as possible. He didn't move. He barely allowed himself to breathe. The footsteps eventually faded into the distance. They were still out there, but farther away now. Ryan waited in his hiding spot, absolutely still, for what felt like hours. Probably at least 4 to 5 minutes in reality. Eventually, he knew he couldn't stay there forever. He had to move. He crawled through the forest with agonizing slowness. Every branch that snapped under his weight sounded like a gunshot to his terrified ears. He kept low, moved carefully, took his time. When the trees finally began to thin and he could see open space ahead, he broke into one final desperate sprint. He recognized the trailhead, the way out, and ran toward it without looking back. Nobody followed him after that. The forest behind him remained quiet. But the damage was done. He was traumatized, exhausted, bleeding from dozens of scratches. He made it back to the construction accommodation and immediately reported the incident to local police. They took his statement, examined the photos on his phone, promised to investigate the area. He never heard anything back from them. No follow-up, no arrests, no explanation. To this day, Ryan believes the people who chased him through the forest were the same ones who built that shrine of shopping carts and burned dolls. What they were doing out there, what their purpose was, what they might have done if they'd caught him, he doesn't know and doesn't want to know. But it felt ritualistic to him. Cult-like. Organized. He finished his 3-month contract and returned home, but the memory has never left him. He still hears the whistling sometimes in his dreams. Still remembers the sound of multiple footsteps closing in from different directions. If there's anything to learn from Ryan's story, it's this: trust your instincts. If you find something that feels wrong, leave immediately. Ryan almost didn't leave when he found that camp. He almost rationalized it away, almost convinced himself it was harmless. And he knows that if he'd hesitated even a few seconds longer, if he'd stayed asleep just a little bit more, he might not have survived to tell the story. 3 people. 3 encounters captured on camera. 3 pieces of evidence that these nightmares actually happened. I want to thank everyone who shared their experiences and footage. These stories matter because they are documented, because we can see proof that they are real. If you have your own creepy encounter that you captured on camera, photos, videos, any kind of documented evidence, I want to hear about it. Email your submissions to creepyhoroavidos@gmail.com with a detailed description of what happened and attach any relevant media. I'm hoping to make this style of video a regular series, but I need your help to make that happen. And if you haven't already, Please click the bell icon and turn on all notifications. Apparently only about 15% of you have done that, and it would really help the channel grow and allow me to create more content like this. Stay safe out there, everyone. Keep your cameras ready. And remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones we can prove are real. Until next time.